video and audio, and I'll be sharing some slides, and those will be recorded. And I always like to start with the title slide, just because I'm into slides. So this is a facilitator, people who facilitate Course of Love gatherings, the art of taking heart. And this is kind of an agenda we've got. We'll start off with an opening meditation. I want to revisit the slide we shared last week on what it means to facilitate, because I think it's, to me, it was powerful and relevant. And have some quotes and readings and sharings around leading from the heart, and then really get into sharing best practices. You know, what is it that works for us as facilitators? You know, what works well for you and your group? And then we'll, towards the end, review the list of ideas that are on our list of ideas to focus on. And let me stop there and pass the baton to Joan for a meditation if you want.
So we are ready to begin?
We have begun.
All right. Well, this is a best practices gathering where we're going to share our best practices for facilitating or for life at large. And these best practices arise from our hearts, from the spirit, the indwelling spirit that leads us to the recognition of our I am and our life's purpose. We are becoming aware of the truth in the daily living of our lives. So I'd like to do a meditation on this awareness. I am the rising tide of truth. The rising of truth may be likened to a rising tide in our sea of awareness. We live in an era where the waters of truth are swelling and lapping on the shores of our lives. Old belief systems are being eroded, entrenched patterns washed away. Even our footsteps leave no lingering impressions on sand where truth has touched. We welcome the tide waters of truth as we allow the truth to set us free. Life is lived anew in an ever-expanding context and ever-extending creation. The tidal waters of truth beckon us to a greater awareness of our indwelling I am, the I am God created self. And so, what is rising for you? This rising sea of awareness that we are experiencing in our lives now.
One quick thing for me, Joan, was that your creation, that entrance into the meditation? That was absolutely beatific. It was beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
That was your creation?
Yes.
Love it.
With spirit, of course.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks.
I appreciate it too. Thank you, Joan.
Well, again, it is what touches our hearts. And what is guiding us to living anew. And we are becoming so aware of this guidance that's rising within us. And yes, it is. It's a beautiful place where we can be who we are in truth, live as who we are in truth. So we're going to take this idea of this ever-expanding context in which we live, and see how it relates to the day-to-day, to living our lives, facilitating our classes, relating to life at large, if you want. So these best practices, what informs your best practices? Is it not something that comes from your heart, the guidance from your heart? And for your purpose, your unique purpose here. And life is our curriculum. So we get a feeling, if perhaps not a full knowing, but we have a feeling of what our lives here on this earth are for. And so I'll get us started with our discussion of best practices for one I discovered it as a parent, as an educator, and as a facilitator, that I am here to encourage and to inspire. And so I'd like to share with you a poem that I actually wrote to inspire my daughter, who was in one of those life challenges and was thinking about moving to a new place. So, and here it is. The barn swallow said to the robin, "Is it not time for you to go? The weather is getting warmer here, and the creeks have started to flow. What keeps you here, my favorite friend, while destiny awaits your song? Rise up and fly, my courageous one, for your heart knows where you belong. Fear not of leaving me here alone, for where you go is not unknown. Like the ocean remembers its shore, we will be as we were before." Thank you.
Well, something that strikes me that we talked about a little bit last week is kind of expanding the role of facilitator. To realize that you talked about what is my purpose in life, and I think it's to bring healing, and that I'm healed as I help others heal. And as a facilitator, and this may sound circular, I think in some ways I am here to help other healers heal. And it kind of relates to groups. I mean, I'm not here to be, the facilitator of all groups. I'm here to help others facilitate and bring healing into their lives. I'm complete.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Karen.
I came in asking my mother, why am I here and who am I? And it's always been in my forefront of thinking and feeling that, that was the most important thing to remember, to find out, to figure out. And I did all different kinds of things to do that. And I feel like my purpose being here is to remind people who we are. I think the identity crisis of forgetting that we're the truth of who we are is the cause of all the problems. And so I find myself mirroring for people in conversation and in any situation I find myself in, the truth of who they are, regardless of where they are now, especially if they're not in touch with the truth of who they are. So I would just say, I don't know if I encourage, I almost feel like my purpose has a little urgency to it. So I kind of run around and show up in different places and don't stay for too long, but drop the seeds, and kind of move along. That's kind of how it happens. I've spent 30 years as a massage therapist and a Reiki master, and so healing is definitely a part of it, but the first workshop I ever taught was called Healing Illusions That Hurt, because that's the only thing that needs to be healed, are illusions. And so I absolutely love the purpose with which I feel my life was meant for, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Now there's a sharing of a best practice, isn't it? Came from the heart, came from your life's curriculum, from the very beginning. Yes. And so we are doing beautiful work. We are healers in whatever way it arises for us, and it's all unique. So it's anyone else?
While somebody's waiting to talk, I want to say that I am taking notes, and I'll share this slide either at the end of the session or afterwards. It'll be emailed out. And while I'm talking, some of you may have heard this from me before, but in our Zoom groups and in-person groups, I personally have found it very healthy and helpful for the group itself, for the group collectively and individuals, to rotate the role of facilitator, to let others who are willing and interested facilitate the group, to experience what it means to kind of oversee or be observant of the spirit and the collective web of relationship. And then the other thing in Zoom gatherings, because I do a couple of them, is what best practices, and we do that here, but we ask people to mute when not sharing and to say, I'm complete when they're done. So those are 3 best practices I've got. I'm complete.
There was a practice that I heard years and years ago. It was by a spiritual teacher named Carolyn Mace. She was talking about how she prepares teaching or facilitating. Because I really love the way she said it, because she says, I'm teaching this stuff, so I had better know it because I'm the one up front. So whenever I'm facilitating and the chapter at hand for next week, I'll read it 2, sometimes 3 times, just so that I know it cold, just in case. It can help sometimes. Complete.
Thank you.
This is Mark. It's said often, I think, in A Course of Love that we can't give what we don't have ourselves. And I think if we want to envision ourselves as being guiders or leaders, then I think we also have to be very willing to be led and to be guided. And so in that light, my practice is focused on that. I get up about 4 a.m. every morning for the purpose of being guided. And the reason I do it at 4 a.m. is because that's when my ego mind is least active, most sleepy, least awake. And so getting it out of the way helps very much to enable heart and my moving center to enter in, because the ego mind isn't bullying them out. So yeah, at 4, I do some body movements to open the moving center, and then listen to music or art that touches my heart, and then get into meditation. So I really haven't done much to wake up the mind, and I find I'm far more receptive to being guided. My ego mind is not trying to say I know, but rather, please guide me. I'm complete.
Thank you.
I'd like to share something that Joe shared with us last week when we were in Santa Fe regarding the master and the student. And it said the only difference between the master and the student is that the master has mastered the art of always being a student. And, you know, in the groups I facilitate, I really try to avoid being seen as the teacher. If, you know, if there's no need for intermediaries, then I'm not one either. We can lead. I find leading by questions of inquiry to allow people to kind of stop and find out something for themselves instead of being given answers. Is a comfortable approach for me. Complete.
You know, it reminds me of something I experienced when Mari was here in Santa Fe, where somebody had asked her, Mari, I don't understand what this elevated self of form is. And she goes, I don't understand it either. It's like, you know, people were expecting her to be the authority. Surely she's got to have all the answers. And she's like, and that's something that she and Glenn are really pushing hard at, is to not have formal teachers, to not have a Course of Love Institute that is seen as an authority to teach this stuff. And I think that's core to how we facilitate too. Like you said, Steve, you know, I'm not the teacher, I'm complete.
And Joe, would you put up the slide? I'd like to read a section about the role of envisioning, imagining, and desire. And let's see. You're going to throw up this, or you're going to put up the slide? There it goes. Okay. So I'll start with leading from the heart, but open your heart, for the one who dwells there in union with all will emerge from this opening. What was once a tiny pinprick of light becomes a beacon as you open your heart and allow your true identity to be what is, even within your form. In this time of Christ, the time of direct relationship and direct sharing, the probable future you imagine, envision, desire will be what you create. A shared vision of unity and a return of all to the state natural to all is what I asked you to envision, imagine, and desire. So let's put it back down again, Joe. So this shared vision of unity and returning to a natural state and living from that state a time of direct relationship and direct sharing. And this is part of that rising tide, this rising sea of awareness that we're immersed in now. So, is there any response to these ideas of direct sharing or that there's no longer an intermediary, that we are receiving the truth, and it can be from the words written in the book. It can be even from our existing institutions, but we're hearing everything anew. We've talked in the past about how you can pick up A Course in Miracles or A Course of Love, and 6 months after reading it, find that the material is totally new to you. Yeah. So it is. We're now in this phase of direct sharing, and it's new. We're beacons of the new. So, do we have a comment or a response?
I have a comment. I've always felt like I had a direct relationship with the Creator, and was always confused when someone said, you know, you can't talk directly to God. And I go, no, that's not true. And I just finished watching the Netflix series. It was 55 episodes on the life of Buddha. And Buddha taught right from the beginning that there's a direct path, that don't take another as your guru, that the direct path, the connection to the creation is available for everyone. And I think people have forgotten that. And it was nice to hear that again. And the Course certainly in every page says that. I'm grateful for that. I'm complete.
Thank you for that lovely sharing, Karen. And I want to say ditto to everything you just said. The other thing that comes forward for me is lately I have been discovering that by obeying God, by following my inner knower's guidance, that has been so powerful in developing self-trust and making me open and making me open-hearted. It has been so powerful in helping me see myself through God's eyes. I'm complete.
Joan, I'd like to share something that my wife shared in our group last Thursday night. And it was from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a Jesuit monk, apparently passed in 1955, so he's not medieval. But it says, "You are not a human being in search of a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual being immersed in a human experience." And I think that's fundamentally what A Course of Love and even A Course in Miracles is trying to tell us. That we are the Son of God, one in being, created in the same thought, quality of thought. And we're simply asked to remember that and live from that then. And how we can help others do that is, the sharing and union and relationship we're called to. Complete.
Yeah, it seems like reminding others of that truth is how we remember it ourselves. You know, we need each other. I'm complete.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll jump in with a real quick one. I've had these blocks for some time. It doesn't matter the book, the teacher, the teaching, whatever. Joe, you once upon a time called it religious residue, something like that. And it pretty much is that's a really good description. I've taken a different approach because since I do have these blocks that keep kind of getting in my way, for lack of a better way to say it. Okay, I'm handicapped. Just accept it. I mean, that's kind of what I tell myself. The other way is relation and dialogue, because every time I go outside there, every time I interact with life, it doesn't matter the life, I can feel a spirit essence within it. And so I guess you could call that a method B for getting to the, for getting to the promised land, or whatever you want to call it. It's worked really well for me. So I don't know if that helps, but it's been working.
So how would you summarize that?
Plan B, I don't know. Just a relation and dialogue with life. And I've often called it life rubbing up against life. So.
Life rubbing against life. Yes, yes. The beautiful triggers, the friction that allows the pearl, the seed within the oyster, to become the pearl. Yeah.
So I have a question to facilitate some more discussion. I don't know if anybody else deals with this, but the groups I'm part of involve people. And sometimes we can have characters, who, like Tom was talking about, think they're interested in self-help or therapy, or, people who go on, or people who go off topic, or, consume a lot of time like I'm doing now. Anyway, what's the best practice? I'm interested in the best practice people have for how do you deal with characters, people who just happen to be people. So I'm complete.
This is Lori. I'd like to kind of piggyback or just kind of add to what you said, Joe. Something came to me since earlier in the conversation when we were talking about the possibility of people needing counseling, if you will, like stuff going on in their life and they're just kind of confused about it, maybe not knowing how to fix a suffering that they might be experiencing. And of course, in Miracles, I learned that it's a cry for love. So I'm with Tom's sentiments about having a guideline structure, if you will, like we had yesterday. Thank you, Mark, for leading the Sunday sharing group, where people understand that they're coming to an experience, a sharing group that actually has an intention. And what is the intention of the group? And that would be a simple way, I think, of catching people's attention. What is your intention? And the collective intention is to learn from Jesus in a course of love, or whatever you want to title it. I'm complete.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, I'm not complete. My idea is that who better to help them with their suffering and transcend it than Jesus? I learned that when I read A Course in Miracles or A Course of Love, I can transcend any little sufferings. I'm complete.
I've had that come up. There's someone who attends my Fourth Wednesday group that often is intoxicated and likes to take the conversation to a whole nother world. And I'm fortunate that the minister of the church attends that group and kind of knows that, I kind of hand that off to her. But starting the group with the meditation and setting the intention for the group is a way to kind of get everybody on the same page. Only this gal always shows up 15 minutes late. So I kind of, in my heart, just say, okay, God, whatever button she pushes, make it productive. Let's use what's happening here for the good of all. And I have to take my hands off of it because my ego wants to stand up and, say, hey guys, we have an hour here. Let's focus. So I end up holding the space kind of in a little different way when somebody like that is around. Just my intention is forefront, that whatever happens will be valuable to everyone, regardless of the form it shows up in, because I can't control it.
Last night, I was with a group, and there was a topic that came up. Sadness, actually, was this topic. And I found that sadness is rooted in, and you're going to see where I'm going with this, the sadness is rooted in what Course in Miracles calls special relations. When special relationships, special relationships, when they don't work, sadness kicks in. And I mentioned that to the group, and it went over everyone's head. So when people aren't ready, or they don't, they're not there yet. I mean, when I mentioned special relation, and and I called it out, your child, your dog, it could be your house, your car, whatever it is that you have a special attachment to, that you've elevated above other people's specialness. They just weren't there yet. They didn't understand it, so that went nowhere. So as far as like helping people, and some of the essence is they're not ready for, so other than just compassion and dialogue, I don't know what else there is. Complete.
Somebody mentioned an hour. I can't remember who was just sharing, but that's a question I have. Is I'm curious whether people have hour-long meetings or hour and a half. We do hour and a half, both in Zoom and in person. But I'm just curious what the duration is of your meetings, your gatherings.
Hour and a half.
The meeting I facilitate is an hour and a half, and I guess I'm kind of, when you're starting a new group, you have people coming in at all levels. I think, as was said earlier, one of the best practices is to try and somehow instill a sense of curiosity and a desire to go further, each person individually. There's an old Taoist saying, we do not seek to mimic the masters, we seek what they sought. And, the masters are always seeking. I think it's, Buddha talks about the beginner's mind, and trying to instill that interest and curiosity, I think, is really important. And the other thing I want to say too, though, is that when you have people at different levels, there are people, and I come from, my background is more of an intellectual academic kind of thing, where I like to teach people what this is about, rather than trying to say, hey, let's go on this journey of discovery together. But at some point, you have to learn the alphabet before you can learn what words are, and you have to learn words before you can engage in conversation. So, there is some value to knowing what the basic tenets of the Course in Miracles, the Course of Love are, and not that we're trying to, have a test at the end to see if you got everything that was said right about the Course of Love, but but certainly there is a value to having a good understanding of it as you facilitate. And then if you can instill a sense of curiosity, I think you can maybe pass that facilitating role around, trying to demonstrate that this is more about sharing experiences than knowledge about the course itself. I'm complete.
I would just like to say that I'm wondering about something, and maybe I'm the only one who's wondering. But I'm listening to everyone, and I'm just wondering what the Chorus of Love would have to say in response to this discussion. I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of it's in the addendum. You know, the addendum talks a lot about what it means to facilitate a group. And that was something I was just going to mention as a best practice I have for people who are new to the course, because they're often, I'm like, okay, the first thing you need to do is to go to the end of the book if they have an early printing of it. But go to the addendum, because the addendum talks about, you know, how to study the book and what you'll experience as you study it. And there is a good deal of information in the addendum on facilitating, how to facilitate. I'm complete.
I actually started my group the first time we met. We read the addendum, and I said, you know, it's kind of odd we're starting at the back, but this really sets up what this is all about and how we're to use it. So I found it very useful to start there. I agree. I'm complete.
Yes, I always find that the beginnings and endings are one. And so I will often, if we're in a group that is going through chapter by chapter, well, then I will often read, or we'll have us read, someone read, the last few paragraphs of the chapter. And that has a way of tending to set up what we're going to be looking at in that chapter. So yeah, I like that practice of doing, keeping the end in mind. It becomes an organizer for what we're going to receive, the way we're going to receive. And of course, the Course of Love, when we are engaged in direct sharing, giving and receiving are one, and they're ongoing. And so at this point in our sharing, I'd like to go to the text on the full life. And this is on page 169. If you have your Course of Love book, and I would like some volunteer readers. We're going to be reading about a page, and let this let this reading be a trigger for our sharing again of our best practices. It's been quite rich.
Where are we again, Joan?
Okay, we're going to be in the Course, chapter 26. It's called The Full Life. And we're going to start with paragraph 2613. Are you simply ready to be done with the way things have been and to begin a new way? Are you not ready to listen to a new voice? And I think that's one thing we are doing with our groups. We're bringing a new voice. You know, most in the courses, they've read the course from at home, but through our engagement as facilitators, everyone is hearing anew, hearing these words anew, touching their lives again. So let's a volunteer. Okay, Steve, yes. Steve, read down to 2113 to 2116, if you would.
Okay. Are you not simply ready to be done with the way things have been to begin a new way? Are you not ready to listen to a new voice? All this frustration and impatience has been building. This buildup has been necessary. Now, like an explosion waiting to happen, it only needs a trigger to be released. With its release, the new can begin. This course is but a trigger. These words, the prelude to the explosion. It is as if you have been waiting for someone to whisper, now. The whisper has come, the time is now. Can you let the worries of today leave your mind? Can you let the disappointments of yesterday go and be no more? Can you let the planning for the future cease? Can you be still and know yourself?
So this is one of our first practices as facilitators. And someone had mentioned that before, unless we can get still and know ourselves, it'll be challenging to lead others. And so the importance of that, our own personal practices, perhaps, in getting ready for facilitating a group.
Joan, one thing that came to mind in terms of a best practice is it talked about this pent-up enthusiasm and an explosion. And I think, I've experienced that in groups where people get so excited about this stuff, And I think as a facilitator, we need to be ready for that and just go, yeah, let the explosions happen. I'm complete.
If we could go back to the first sentence of 14, all this frustration and impatience has been building. And I don't know, I often feel that there's something going on in the world where more and more people are asking the same question as Bill Tedford and Helen. There's got to be another way. There's so much divisiveness and hate and anger and pettiness, and people, I think, are just getting fed up, and they're really truly looking for another way, and it's come upon us. And I think that's why, as they say, this time of Christ consciousness has changed. It's the time of Christ consciousness. Accept it.
Steve, I've mentioned before in other groups about how I remember as a youngster being a creature of love, then becoming an egoic creature, lost and confused, and then finding my way back to love. Kind of a circle, or it just came around, whatever. And I've asked before, why isn't this stuff taught? I mean, why wasn't I made aware of, the sheer purity and perfection of love from a very early age? Because as I started to get, lose my way, call it teenage angst, whatever you want to call it. And what you just mentioned about the planet and all the frustration and fear, hate, anger, there hasn't been any universal teacher about this. Well, I don't know. That's not true. It hasn't been taught en masse, I guess. And, something, Karen, you said about, talking to God. I've made a comment many times, and this is an example of experience and how that experience can be passed down. I was in a group once, and they were talking about the Holy Spirit. Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit, Holy Spirit. I can't hear the Holy Spirit. Well, one of the group members asked me, do you ever feel joy? Well, of course I do. Do you ever feel love? Well, yeah, of course I do. That's the Holy Spirit. Doesn't always happen in words, and maybe I'm just too dense to hear, hear it come out in English or something. But that was one of the wisest things I ever heard in a group. Is someone said, anytime joy is being experienced or expressed, God's behind it. Complete.
Okay, let's go a few more paragraphs here. Do we have another reader? Okay, Lemoyne. Go through 26:18. Okay.
I'm going to do 17.
Okay.
Okay. So it asks those questions. Can we let it go? And then it says, this is perhaps disappointing to you, but it is all that is required. If you could truly succeed at doing this for one instant, you would experience all that is holy and be forever new. You may experience disappointment at these words and feel as if you've been waiting to be invited to a party and that the invitation hasn't come. This is because you are ready for the next step, the step of being engaged with life, the step of living from love. And I assure you, there is no need to sit about and wait for the time of celebration to come. This is the invitation to the celebration. This is the invitation to greet this day with no worry, disappointment, or planning. This is the invitation to greet yourself and to find yourself within this day. Shall I go on?
Yes, actually, let's go down through 26:21.
Okay. It, it requires no new plans. It asks not that you make any decisions. It asks not that you do anything new. This is an invitation from love to love. It asks only that you be open and allow giving and receiving to take place. It asks only that you be open and allow giving and receiving as one to take place. It asks only that you be unoccupied with the old so that the new may arrive. It asks only that you listen to your heart and let yourself be heard. I cannot tell you here what you will hear. How can I when each of you will hear the answer of your heart? The calling of love to love inviolate? The answer that only you can hear. There is no mold, no form, no stock answer. This is why all answers have disappointed you in the past. Your answer is not the same as any other. No matter how filled with wisdom one person's answer may be, it is not yours. You are a thought of a God, an idea. This thought or idea is what you seek. It can be found only at its source. Its source is love, and its location is your own heart.
Yes, thank you. We'll pause there.
You know, it just strikes me that in so many different ways, these paragraphs, and thank you for picking this out, Joan, but in so many different ways, these paragraphs are basically talking what the Course of Miracles talks about. It says we don't need to seek and find love. We just need to seek and find those obstacles that we put up between us and love. And so this is just saying, let it go, let the obstacles go and just connect. I'm complete.
This may sound irreverent, but my next book title is called Undressing God. And it's all about taking off everything that we've put onto the image or idea of God and them finding, our own truth will be seen once we take off what we've put on. That's my belief, and that's been my experience. I'm complete.
Karen, I have to tell you, I wrote a book of poems called something like Going to God's Dressing Room. And the thing that I really appreciate so much right now about the paragraphs we've been reading is how it emphasizes our uniqueness and distinctness. How there are 7 billion dialogues going on, so to speak. I'm complete.
So we truly are direct, sharing directly. We read words, but we received them as one into our hearts, and then we had our own unique responses. How beautiful is that?
I'm compelled to ask if I should re-show that slide with the quotes, because the next one is called "Expression of the Self of Love and Form."
Yeah, please do. Yes, take us right. So we're going to go down to expression of the self of love in form. Love is the spirit of the wind that animates all form. Love is spirit, is God, is creation. Expression of the self of love in form is not something that can be learned. It is something that only can be lived. This is the time of the fulfillment of the lesson of the birds of the air, who neither sow nor reap, but sing a song of gladness. There's that Holy Spirit's joy again, right? That song of gladness.
What's coming to me is whenever I've pondered something, my old practice was to get still, get quiet, and detach. But what was happening is that I would stop participating in life. And so it would be like being out of the flow. And so I'd sit and wait and sit and wait and meditate some more and sit and wait some more and wonder if I was doing everything quite right. And then it occurred to me, well, I'm really not connected to life while I'm asking the question of life. I've kind of taken myself out of my life to do that. And so what I find for me works is asking my question in the moment of what is occurring and not taking myself away from the moment to inquire. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm complete.
You're talking about being in the flow, and it was, because I was thinking, as you were sharing, or maybe just prior to it, that there's a song I've heard that I really like. This is "God is a River," and there's a poem that says, and my son is a river guide. He has been for like 15 years, and I've probably been on 15 or 20 multi-day river trips where we, camp along the river. And this poem says, basically, we're not river guides. The river is guiding us, but in order to be guided by the river, we have to be in the flow. I'm complete.
A few days ago, I heard on NPR a Jewish woman was describing her Jewish parents who grew up in Nazi Germany under Nazi occupation. Excuse me. The thing that was so beautiful about the story was because their parents, their childhood was, for lack of a better way to say, interrupted by the harshness of the times. What was really quite precious about the story is, okay, once they got to the United States, they grew up, teenagers, fall in love, kids, typical life. The parents never, since their childhood was interrupted, they, I guess you could say, they rediscovered their childhood as 30 and 40-year-olds, and it carried right into their their senior age. How grandma was always extremely playful, extremely the kid thing. She never got to be a kid as a kid. So that whole thing about the experiences, and I don't know why. So something somebody said just reminded me of that, and about life and how what you embrace. So your mom being a childlike. Oh, mom could be serious, but she had her moments where she didn't have any problems getting on the ground and rolling around with the puppies, at 70 years old. Complete.
I feel like I'm almost oversharing, but this feels so relevant. I really want to share it. I did my training with my shaman back in the early 90s, and one of the initiations was to water. And what he had me do was sit in a stream that was, about not 3 feet deep, probably about 18 inches deep. And he said, just the point of this initiation is to connect with water. And so I sat there and I could feel the water hitting my body because there was a current. And after about 15 minutes, I just let my eyes close, and it felt like the water was running through my body. And it felt that the water that had gone through my body was different than the water before it had joined with me. And it just was such a beautiful experience of union and oneness, and how everything's significant. How even though the water was still the water, it was now somehow including me in the joining of it. And I think of the pass-through comment in A Course of Love, how we're meant to let things pass through us. And I think that's very much about the relationship and what it looks like of connecting and not attaching to anything, but having the experience, having that pass-through experience of understanding and getting to know life. Thanks, I'm complete.
In day 37, the Course says that God is relationship. So if I can look at the collective web of relationship that exists amongst a group, and Mark and Tom have both heard me say this before, maybe Steve as well. I mean, there's 10 of us in this call. So there's 90 relationships that exist. And if I can think in my mind, this collective web of relationship is God. I mean, that changes how I think about it, how I feel about it, how I relate to it, what I want from it, what I want to, how I want to serve it. But, these are truly divine experiences. I'm complete.
Joe, that goes back to what I read earlier too, that we are a spiritual being immersed in a human experience. And we've simply forgotten that. We don't, quote, see it. We don't feel it. We don't experience it. But when we become still, then it can enter. And it's kind of like you, Karen. You feel that water going through you. You're immersed in this field of love, of the godness. I think that's simply all we're asked to come to. complete.
And then through our forms, the self of love in form, through its expression, we are giving it new life. We are creating the new from love as love, and the cycle continues. So creation of the new is the very, at the bottom of the slide, creation of the new has begun. We are an interactive part of this creative act of a loving creator. Creation is a dialogue. Creation, which is God and us in unity, will respond to our responses, will respond to what we envision, imagine, and desire.
I guess that begs the question, what do we envision, imagine, and desire for the gatherings that we facilitate?
Yes.
The most valuable thing I get out of the meetings, especially face to face, I love hearing anecdotes, tales, and stories, or parables, anything, whatever, however it manifests, I don't care, that work, that create an understanding for you. Because, I mean, that example that I gave of a meeting up in Washington where I used to live, where they said, you know, anytime I feel joy and love, that's the essence of God right there. That's the Holy Spirit. Because I was fighting with the religious terminology of Holy Spirit, the religious residue, because I've been struggling with a lot of the terminology with these teachings, just because they've been hijacked, for lack of a better way to say it. So meetings, and sometimes I try to actually nudge the group in that direction to find what works, because everyone has a different approach. Like Joe said, there's 90 of us, there's 90 different relationships, and you know what works for me might not work for another. And so because yeah, I can read the book and I'll get my understanding from it, but it's my understanding, only mine. So going to the meetings and actually hearing others comparing notes. Joe has said relation and dialogue so many times, it's like, okay, I got it. It takes a little while, but I got it. But it's true, you know, relationships and dialogues, you know, life rubbing up against life. That's love, love in motion, love in practice. So that's what I try to see in meetings, and that's actually what I try to do when it's my turn to facilitate, is to see if we can get people to compare notes about what works, especially on the subjects of the topics. Complete.
Thank you. And that's what works. So let's keep exploring that. What works for you? Joe has a way of asking really good questions. And so it's something that in our co-facilitating here that I really appreciated, because those questions lead out our heartfelt, the heartfelt practices, or the practices that will relate to the way that we live in the world, the way we function in truth, according to our purpose. So I just want to acknowledge and thank Joe for those good questions. So,
well, I wanted to share. This has been pretty amazing. This is what I've written up so far, and it's too small to read. So you will get these in email afterwards. But this is an amazing list of best practices that we've shared so far. And I'm running out of space, so we can't share anymore, I guess. But anyway, I really appreciate this dialogue we've had about, you know, what works for us as a facilitator.
Joan, if I could add that in the petition to envision, imagine, and desire unity, one first has to ask, who's present? Ego or the self? And what state of being has the capacity to ask that question in truth? Because I think one of the difficulties we can get into is if the ego asks that question, then we come up with all kinds of imaginary solutions that picture or project what this divine nature and what this love is. And then it becomes what I've always referred to as the Hallmark card love, you know, the icing on the cake type love. And we always have to remain aware of the presence of what is present. And those, you know, that petition to then envision, imagine, and desire is felt, is received differently. Complete.
Thank you.
You know, I find that if my ego is the one asking the question and my heart is open to hear the answer, or at least willing, I find that often it's getting comfortable living in the question and not having a specific answer is where I'm led. And then, you know, the self that shows up in that space is the truth of who I am. And then the dialogue can happen. But I think it's okay that I ask a question from where I am. I mean, ego wants to know. Ego definitely wants to know, needs to know, has to know. And if I'm in that space, I'll let ego talk while I'm breathing and kind of slowing down enough to say, okay, I hear you. You know, there's a piece of you that's attached to this. Let's just settle down and feel our way through this. And most of the time, there's no answer in that moment for the ego. There is just a sense of peace in knowing that I don't need to know. Later, I'll get my answer when I'm not in a headspace of ego. But I think it's still useful that ego gets to ask, you know, when it shows up, because that's what it does for me. Ego needs to know. So thank you. I'm complete.
I'm reminded of an interview. I know that Lemoyne unmuted a minute ago, so probably wants to talk. But this astrophysicist was being interviewed, and somebody said, "Doesn't it bother you that you have all these unanswered questions?" And he goes, "No, I don't live for the answers. I live for more questions, for new questions." I'm complete. Lemoyne?
Yeah, one thing that I know there's no more room on your list, but I think for me, you know, the best practice that I can see within and without these groups is to maybe summarize it as just checking to see if I am holding that space, holding the spacious sense of the elevated self form. And I think one of the things that has led me here and hasn't fallen away is this idea that we're all in this together, and that's just fact, right? And so, I kind of want to return to Tom's original question about what about somebody who's like stuck, like you can see where they go around, the record goes around and it skips back and they just keep going around and around. And I've seen that, in my experience from Landmark, somebody who's so attached to their victimization that they made one of these leaders whose practice is like, I am just nothing and word, break down and just start screaming at them. And, they defended the leader and pushed the person out on a temporary basis because their excuse was, we're not doing psychology. We're not going to work on your issues here. That this is not psychology. And yet I think in this course, this is a course in mind training. I mean, it's about being able to change your mind, right? Her mind, this particular person, her mind is stuck with this particular victimization that just, it's like always there for her. And I had the thought while I was thinking about this is, if access is the key and the treasure, kind of like I could hear everything she says now. It's like, I've lost the key, I've lost the key, I've lost the key. And anyway, it seems to me that that these groups might be able, that I see it as like you described it once, and it may be a reading from the addendum or something, the merging of the clear pools, that in that there may be enough for that person to rediscover the key. So, it's I get it. It appears difficult, but maybe it's just different to deal with someone who's continually stuck in the same place. But I see these groups for the celebration and creation of the new, and part of that is the healing and the releasing of the past, so that it seems to me, I don't want to should on it, but it seems to me we should be able to hold enough space for that person to be listened to in a way that enables them to see another way. And so, yeah, I'm complete. I think with that part, but I also wanted to say that for me, I've gotten this new definition of life as sharing, being in unity in relationship. And I get that I really don't know what it is, but I know it's available in these groups. So now I'm complete. Thank you.
Well, yesterday when Mark was facilitating, and there were some, just some, not rules, just suggestions, guidelines, at the beginning to, yo, people, please stay on topic. And for the most part, everyone did. So maybe that's all that's needed. Complete.
Well, Joan, should we shift gears to our next session and talk about what we should do?
Okay. Do you want to do your closing meditation then? And then go to the...
I'd like to do the ideas for our future gathering and then do the meditation.
All right. Let's do it.
So here's our current list, and you can see with the check marks that we made pretty good progress of covering a number of topics. And then we've got kind of 3 more that we're kind of wrestling with. How is a course of love changing lives, living a course of love, enabling deep, vulnerable sharing? How am I relating to my own feelings as I facilitate? Those kind of seem like the 3 next ones we might want to consider. And we have the technology to do a poll. So hopefully you can see this. And so maybe you can pick on which of these you'd like to vote on. You get to pick one. Can you see that? The poll?
I can.
Okay.
But how do you respond to it?
I don't know. I think you just click on one.
Yeah, you just click and it registers and you submit.
Yeah.
Complete.
I just tapped on it on the phone. Complete.
I don't know if I guess I don't get a vote. But it looks like living the course and talking about how the course changes lives seems to be the front runner.
Could I make a comment about one of them?
Yeah.
It says deep vulnerable sharing, and I think one thing that's in these at least in A Course in Miracles, maybe it's not so obvious in A Course of Love, is the idea of defenselessness.
Yeah.
And to my mind, vulnerability, the way people use it, it implies that they could be injured. And I think the idea of defenselessness, deep defenseless sharing, is maybe a little more in line. Yeah. But maybe that's the distinction about that discussion would be about. Anyway, I'm complete.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think being open and vulnerable, sharing deeply, for men anyway, is especially older men, is a life and death issue. You know, I heard a program about why there's so much suicide amongst older men. And it said because we don't feel part of, we're not connected, we're not in a community, we don't have close, intimate friends where we can be open and vulnerable. So, you know, you can look at that topic as something that's, okay, that's nice as a facilitator to be able to do that and facilitate that kind of open vulnerability. But for me, I think it's much more than that. It's life and death for old men. And I'm an old man, so I'm complete.
Hey, I'm older than you. Let me say this one thing that you just said, Joe, because I totally understand where you're going with what you were meant by all that. One of the difficulties I am having in my 60s here now is so many people that I meet in the world are in their ego. And I just have a really hard time relating to people who are just totally saturated, engrossed. I mean, our president is the poster child, for someone that's totally in their ego. I'd rather be alone than be friends with Trump. So I don't know. Shoot, I don't know if I'm like trying to make an exception to anything you were just saying, because you're right. But I'd rather be around people like you guys, not people like my president. So, complete.
Yeah, it's kind of how do we deal with that when people in our groups are in the ego? I'm complete.
Well, I think in terms of vulnerability, in our sharings here, we're all vulnerable. We're open. And we allow, even though in our sharing, there may be a part of us that's a bit fearful, but yet we go with it. We share anyway. Because I think deep down we know that nothing exists that is not shared. And so we're always in our life here in a dance between our vulnerability and our invulnerability. But how else would we know that we are invulnerable unless we experienced those vulnerabilities? So they have a purpose. They show us again how to live our life anew by embracing it. always embracing. Yeah. And I think Laurie had, or Karen.
I just wanted to say, I remember when I was being taught vulnerability is a powerful thing, and I thought, how could vulnerability be powerful? I'm wide open, leading an ego-led life and feeling like, no, I stayed safe not being vulnerable because you won't know my weaknesses. And I took that for a few months and wrote about it and wrote about it. And what I came to was I'm only strong when I am vulnerable. My heart does not need protecting. My heart leads me. It's out in front. I don't need to protect my feelings. That's where I'm strong. And if I'm not being vulnerable, like a tree that can blow with the wind, I will break. Joe, like, the older men, feeling like, and being defenseless is every bit a part of being vulnerable, because self-defense prepares us to be attacked. If we've like this at the world, we'll get that back. And learning to be vulnerable, I think, is one of the most crucial pieces on this path to getting clear about who we are and having that experience. And I think A Course of Love group is the place to create safety so that people can learn what vulnerability really is and have that experience. I feel responsible for creating a safe place so people really do feel they're safe so they can be vulnerable. I think it's imperative. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. I'd like just to say that I have been feeling safe to be in the Course of Love groups to share my personal experiences and what, peeling the layers, shedding the layers of the ego. And everything that everyone said just recently, I'm reminded of this saying in A Course of Miracles, complete and annotated text: love is your power. So if I'm being love, and the more I constantly practice being love, that's all I get back from the world, people I know and don't know. So walking from the Bible, walking the narrow path isn't an easy one. But the more I practice what you just said, Karen, being vulnerable is or whoever said, maybe it was Joan, the more I practice being vulnerable, I realize my invulnerability, and that love is my power. Thank you, I'm complete.
We just voted, and we voted on how the Course of Love is changing our lives, but then all of our discussion since the polling has been about vulnerability. And it seems to me, based on our discussion, and also kind of a logical ordering, or ordering of the heart, that maybe the vulnerability needs to be the next topic, because that would enable our hearts to be open and our lives to be changed by the Course of Love. So you guys okay with that being our next topic, is enabling deep vulnerable sharing?
Yeah, because to me, both of them coincide.
Yeah.
I didn't know which one to vote for. Thank you.
And so if anybody wants to actively participate in preparing or participating in the next gathering in 2 weeks, let Joan or I know. So the topic will be enabling deep vulnerable sharing, or being defenseless, as the Course in Lemoyne say. Let me read a closing meditation.
Joe, real quick, before the meditation, I want to thank everyone, because I thought I was going to just come on board and ask one quick question and go up, but there was so much richness and good stuff that I ended up hanging out the whole time. Thank you for letting me.
Yeah, thank you. So here's a closing meditation. We've been talking about best practices. This meditation goes to the level of best being. Being goes beyond practice. Being observant, a best being. Be observant. Be willing to receive instead of plan. Receiving is not an inactive state. Observation is the active state of reception, the state not confined to receiving, but a state of giving and receiving as one. Observation makes you one with what you observe. Being one with what you observe causes you to know the proper response. It is in responding properly that you will know what to do. And so it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear ones. Have a great week.
See you,
Or
Mark.
2 weeks. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Love you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, y'all.
I'm going to stop the recording.